Let's talk with Arun Kumar Singh, who is India Ambassador to the United States. He's joining us on the show right now. A very good morning, Mr. Singh, and thank you so much for your time. And firstly, with respect to the tariffs, a lot's been happening, and India is, of course, welcoming the much-awaited meet between US and Russia. But for now, the stance that remains for India that they are criticizing the US decision, describing it as unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. Going ahead, what sort of a stance that India will work with? Because yes, of course, back home, a lot of these sectors will get impacted if at all this 50% tariff kicks in.
In fact, there have been reports in the media of a briefing that Indian officials had done yesterday to the Parliamentary Panel on External Affairs. And there they had pointed out that we remain engaged with the US, trying to work out a fair and balanced bilateral multi-sectoral free trade agreement. So that effort certainly continues. As I can see it, India's effort would be to continue those discussions and work out something that works for both sides. I think the challenge is that President Trump, for his own politics, has been projecting to his voting base that he's doing trade deals with various countries where essentially every other country has made concessions and the US has made no concession. And, he projected that in the deal that he did with Indonesia and Vietnam, they completely opened up their market, and yet US has imposed 20% or so tariffs on them. Similarly, in the case of the European Union and Japan, he projected that not only have they opened up their markets, but they've also made commitments to invest $500 billion or $600 billion in the U.S., and that he will control those investments, and that U.S. has still imposed tariffs on them. So he has been projecting that he is getting unilateral advantage in these trade agreements and bringing benefits to the American producer and also getting fresh investments in the U.S. So that's the challenge. And of course, from India's perspective, given where we are, given as a developing country, as the complexity of our economy with a huge engagement in the agriculture sector, which is a source of livelihood for people, we would certainly want to work towards a balanced agreement. So I think that's the discussion that continues. And eventually, President Trump also has to balance out that on one side you have a certain projection related to trade, but on the other side is the broader strategic relationship with India. And how do you strike out a balance between them and not be so obsessed with one sector that you end up disrupting the other? So that's what's playing out. And if you look at the China aspect, they have extended the tariff pause on China. And just a couple of days ago, the U.S. Vice President was asked a question as to why are you not imposing tariffs on China like you've done on India related to purchases of oil from Russia. And he said, because we have so many other factors that we are dealing with in the relationship with China. But the main reason is that the Chinese have shown countervailing power through the export controls on magnet critical minerals. And also when President Trump has threatened high tariffs on China, the U.S. bond market had gone into difficult territory. And so the U.S. did a pause on those tariffs. So I think they are facing the countervailing power from China. So they're being more careful. But I think given all that, U.S. would also need to judge where is the overall balance of relationship that they need with India instead of unnecessarily, and certainly in the case of the tariffs related to Russia, completely unjustified tariffs that they placed on India. So let's see how this discussion continues. I'm sure both countries would not want major slide or disruption in the relationship.
But Ambassador Kumar, now there seem to be two aspects and two layers to this negotiation between India and US, right? Because it seems like what's more problematic or what the bone of contention now is India importing Russian oil. Is it just that, or do you think it's about the tariffs that India slapped on the world?
The talk of India importing Russian oil, I don't think is really justified because, as the Indian statement had pointed out, the earlier U.S. administration had in fact encouraged India to import energy from Russia to keep the global market prices stable. And whatever India imported from Russia was within the price cap. that the US and European countries had. So there was, in effect, no violation of whatever norms those very countries had established. So there is really no justification for using that argument. And also, again, as the Indian statement had pointed out, the Europeans are today buying more from Russia than India is doing. And US itself is buying uranium from Russia because they need that. So what they need, they're continuing to do. So it's not really a justification. It's a narrative that they're building because they want to put some pressure on Russia before the talks that are going to be held in Alaska later this week. And before the talks, they didn't want to directly sanction Russia or put more sanctions on Russia because they want the talks. They didn't want to penalize China for buying from Russia because, as we discussed earlier, they have, let's say, other dimensions. China has countervailing power. So they decided to use India to try and generate pressure on Russia. Now, that's certainly that kind of policy would not be acceptable in India. And, as I feel that, by imposing these kind of penalties, U.S. is really not imposing penalties so much on India. They are imposing a penalty on tariffs on the U.S.-India relationship. Because all this has resurrected memories in India of U.S. earlier being a coercive and unreliable partner, kind of perception that they had tried to come out of in the last 25 years. So I think U.S. also has to be mindful. So I would say, from the Indian perspective, it would be best to remain engaged with the U.S., to keep the dialogue going, discussions going, to try and find a way out. And the U.S. has also to look at the overall picture and understand that given our own political system, India will not be able to accept diktats from the U.S. But having said that, we hope that on Friday when the U.S. President and Russian President Putin meet, if there is some positive movement after that, then that might give a peg for the U.S. to walk back at least from the Russia-related higher tariffs that they have placed on our products.
Right, Ambassador Kumar, also want to get your sense on this meeting that everybody is anticipating and looking forward to. What kind of announcements are you anticipating from that meeting, and how do you think that could impact India's diplomatic positioning with Russia, Ukraine and the US?
So as of now, there's complete uncertainty about how this meeting will play out, what the outcomes will be. There are reports that some function level discussions between Russia and US are going on in the run-up to the meeting. But unlike normal high-level summit meetings, the kind of detailed preparation that is done for such meetings is not there. So ultimately, it will be a question of how President Trump and President Putin relate to each other at the meeting, and what are the takeaways for both that they can both project as wins. Because President Trump, in his second term, has already spoken to President Putin some 5 times, and not much has come out of that. So we have to see. And in the past, again, in first Trump term, Trump had met the North Korean president a couple of times and said that he will try and bring about a path-breaking sort of development in the relationship with the U.S. and North Korea. And nothing came out of that. So let's see. Let's see what happens, because the situation is complicated. Russia has clear demands related to what was seen as Ukrainian territory, related to the kind of militarization that should be in Ukraine, related to Ukraine's relationship with NATO. So there are very clear demands that Russia has. And the European partners of the U.S. and Ukraine are not in agreement with the approach that President Trump has so far articulated, that he's ready to work for territorial concessions from Ukraine. And so is that all, or is he ready to commit that Ukraine will never be a part of NATO, or limits on Ukraine militarization? So those are things we have to see, because there could be some domestic opposition in the US, but more opposition in Europe and from Ukraine. So at the moment, I would say that it's good that the meeting is taking place, but the outcome of that meeting at this stage is very, very uncertain.
All right, but definitely all eyes on that. But with this, Mr. Singh, I would like to thank you for taking the time out and speaking with us this